vantage point over here, but at least the stage probably won't squeak quite as badly. So today we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about Bible geography. I thought as we get rolling through this Old Testament survey, this would be a good idea. Certainly it was helpful for me. When we talk about the necessity of understanding geography, it just comes back to the historical and practical context of whatever we're studying. We saw that in Corinthians, right? And we talked about Corinth and where it was located and some of the dynamics and stuff that had to do where that city was. It just helps us understand the Bible better. And so we'll go through, I have a PowerPoint here that is not only limited to the Old Testament. We're going to talk about some New Testament events in Jesus' life and also some different locations that are talked about in the New Testament. But there's a lot of different information in this, and kids, if you're paying attention, there might even be some animals for you guys to see too. So there'll be some actual pictures, there's a couple of videos, and it should be pretty interesting. So the study of geography is essential to a proper understanding of the Bible because it's a historical book. It describes events in the land of Israel and the surrounding territories, so we need to know what those territories look like and where the different cities are. The more we know about geography pertaining to a Bible passage, the better we can understand the scene and the teaching. We need to ask questions like, where is the author? Where are the recipients? If the passage describes an event, where does it take place? What is the terrain like? What was the weather like? How far was this place from other places mentioned in the same passage? What were the travel routes? What size was this town or city? What was the layout, or what was the location known for? All great questions to ask when you're trying to study through a specific passage. And this requires a good knowledge of Bible geography and a constant reference to maps. The information can be found in good commentaries, surveys, Bible encyclopedias, and Bible atlases. All great resources for you folks to have. Let me give you a couple examples of why geography is essential. In Luke 5:4, the disciples were told to launch out into the deep. Well, the deepest part of the Sea of Galilee is actually towards the east side out from a place called Cursey, and the lake is about 200 feet deep at that part. So if you know that, you can know right where they went when they set their nets. Or consider like Paul's missionary journeys as he's traveling throughout the area around the Mediterranean, whether by sea or by land, the different cities he went to, the different towns he went and planted churches in. He was shipwrecked on an island. Where are all those places located? Can we identify them on a map? Very helpful for understanding the context of the passage. Or what about the Mount of Transfiguration? In Matthew, we're told that it's a high mountain, right? Jesus went up into a high mountain. And this means that the mountain could not be Mount Tabor, which is actually the traditional Mount of Transfiguration, where many people believe the Transfiguration occurred. That's just a little hill. It's not a high mountain at all. The highest mountain is Mount Hermon. It's 9,100 feet tall. That fits much better with the context of the passage. And additionally, right before he went up into the mountain, Jesus was in Caesarea Philippi, which is actually at the base of Mount Hermon, according to Matthew 16:13. And so we see through just a pretty basic understanding of Bible geography and the location of different towns and cities and features, we gain a much deeper understanding of the context. So that's what we're going to try to go through today on here. Hopefully. Pardon the technical difficulties. Okay, so intro to Bible geography. Now I apologize, guys. We are working on the projector. We should be able to get it to have a better focus at some point, but I do have this little laser pointer here so I can help show you guys, I don't know if it's going to work. Okay. All right, so in this course, we're going to do an overview. We can't be exhaustive with it. We can't cover every single little thing. But we're going to go through an overview of some of the different Bible lands in Israel. We're going to look at some of the different features, and I will, when it's blurry like this, I will use the laser pointer and I'll show you right where I'm talking about. So first, as we come out, we get the big picture. Israel is located right here in this part of the world called the Middle East today. Right there, that kind of green-colored section. Here we zoom in a little bit and we see that it sits right in the center of a bunch of different nations, Africa, Asia, and Europe. And these are all the first countries that were settled after the flood. We have Israel right here surrounded by all these other nations. Here's an example of the different sons of Noah and where they settled. We have Israel right here, and generally we have the sons of Ham here. Shem and Japheth went up to the north. So Israel is right smack dab in the middle. And it straddles this ancient crossroads where there was trade and passage of people between all of these ancient kingdoms. It's there for a very specific reason. Israel was the land of the Bible, right? The Jews were committed to the Bible, the oracles of God. They were the caretakers of that. And God put Israel right in the center of all these nations as a witness to himself. That's the purpose of Israel. That's what they were supposed to do. In Ezekiel it says, "Thus saith the Lord God, this is Jerusalem, I have set it in the midst of the nations." That was the point of his chosen nation of Israel. Now expanding out to a big overview, we want to stand back and look at the general region. So here's the region of Israel. We have some big cities over here, and then we have some seas around here in Arabia. Over here to the west is the Mediterranean. It's also called the Great Sea. That's right here. This is the area we're focused on right here, Israel. Up to the north is the Black Sea. And then off to the east, northeast, is the Caspian Sea. And between those two is Mount Ararat. That's right about where Noah's Ark landed, right there. And there's a peninsula up here in between the Mediterranean and the Black Sea. It's called Anatolia, modern Turkey. And the Hittite kingdom was just south of there. Hittite kingdom was something that was just only recently discovered through archaeology, always verified by biblical records, but archaeology backed that up fairly recently. Now down south we have the nations of Egypt and then Arabia down here on this big peninsula. So all of that surrounds Israel, which is right there. The Red Sea is right there as well. To the east is Mesopotamia and some big civilizations that came about right after the flood. Also down here we have the Persian Gulf, which hooks onto the Arabian Sea. It's sometimes called the Lower Sea. So not only is Israel surrounded by lakes and seas, it's also surrounded by nations. Now, if we zoom in even further, and you guys, this is green and this is more yellow because what we have here is called the Fertile Crescent, and it's surrounded by mountains to the north, and it's surrounded by desert down here to the south. Israel is right there, you can see. And this region right here straddles the Arabian Desert, which is this huge expanse all down here, very dry and arid. Most of the region of Shinar, or the Fertile Crescent, is watered by these two big rivers that are mentioned in the Bible, the Tigris and the Euphrates. These little blue lines show that. That's one of the reasons why this area is so fertile and good for growing crops. They actually originate up here in the Taurus Mountains, and Taurus means bowl. The mountains were actually named after Baal, the god that the Israelites encountered through various idolatrous nations around them fairly frequently, and its image was a bowl. Also, according to Genesis 2, the Garden of Eden was somewhere right in here, right near the headwaters of the Tigris and the Euphrates. So in the Bible, the Tigris is called the Hiddekel, and it's about 1,150 miles long, and it has more water in it than the Euphrates does. Now this area between the rivers is called Mesopotamia. That's what it means. It's also called Shinar in Genesis 10:10. That's going to be this big green expanse following the river valley down. After the flood, we have big cities that are established there, like Nineveh, Asher, Babylon, Erech, and Ur. You guys should recognize a couple of those for sure. The Tower of Babel was also built right there. That's where the people decided to rebel against God and then were shot out and sent everywhere. When Abraham was called, he came from here, he traveled northwest to Haran, and then eventually down here to Canaan. That's the route that he took, according to Genesis 11. Canaan, this little strip right here, actually forms a land bridge because on the west we have the Mediterranean, on the east we have this giant desert, and so there was an incredible amount of traffic that went right through this area. That's why Abraham took that. Trying to go from the big cities up here to Egypt, so there's a lot of trade in between those places. Mediterranean Sea and Arabian Desert. Here's some topography for you guys. So we're looking at exactly the same thing. Here's Shinar. Here we have all these mountains up to the north, Taurus, Kurdistan, and Zagros. And then we have Jerusalem right here, and this land bridge that's formed equidistant to the big desert right here. It's a very fertile area. Also, you'll notice, and we'll see this more, it's a very topographical, rocky, mountainous area here through Jerusalem. So we have the Syrian desert and the Arabian desert both. So obviously they wanted to avoid those when they were traveling. The coast all along here is watered by rain from the sea, and Egypt is watered by the Nile River. Now let's talk about the Mediterranean for a couple minutes. It's a significant in the Bible. It's called all these different things. Sea, Great Sea, Uttermost Sea, or Sea of the Philistines. Here's a couple pictures of some different locations throughout the Mediterranean. It's a beautiful place. Acre, Dor, I mean, it looks downright tropical. Caesarea Maritima, Tel Aviv, Joppa. You guys should remember that. This is modern Joppa. Ashkelon. The Mediterranean Sea is pretty much the most important sea in the Bible. Like I said, Paul's missionary journeys were all throughout this area. All the way over to the west, we have the Strait of Gibraltar, and you'll notice the sea is entirely surrounded by land. And I don't know if you guys can see this, but it almost looks as if this coastline would match right up with this coastline, like at some point those two were ripped apart from one another and had fit together before that. Probably occurred during the flood. Here's a shot of the Strait of Gibraltar all the way over on the west side. We have out into the Atlantic Ocean here and then the Mediterranean. Here's a satellite shot. Notice how narrow and tiny that little gap is there. So yeah, it's really tiny. Over here we have the Rock of Gibraltar. We have this scale of 10 miles, so we're looking at what, 12 miles or something across. Very, very narrow. Morocco on one side and Britain on the other. Here's what the rock looks like. It's pretty prominent and tall. There's actually people standing out there in the picture. So from Gibraltar on one side of the Mediterranean all the way to the other side, it's about 2,300 miles. So most of the United States, contiguous United States, taken up by this sea. Now, connected to the Mediterranean Sea, we have a couple different seas that surround the Israelite area. We have the Black Sea, which is the large one up here, and then we have the Sea of Marmara and the Bosphorus Strait. If we zoom in on this, we have the Black Sea, and then that continues right through to this smaller Marmara, and then the Aegean Sea, and that hooks onto the Mediterranean. So they're all connected together. And this is just another close-up of that. You can go all the way through here. Now, during the largest extent of the Roman Empire, they completely surrounded the Mediterranean. We have their two different sides of the empire, and they called it our sea because, hey, they owned all the land around it, so they used it. Oops. Now, in addition to the oceans and lakes and stuff, we have many nations that surrounded Israel. To the east, we have three pagan nations that are mentioned frequently in the Bible: Ammon, Moab, and Edom. Edom, you guys should know, was founded by Esau, his descendants. Moab and Ammon were founded by the children of Lot, and they all dwelt there, and they were all nations that the Israelites at one point or another got involved with in ways that they shouldn't have. Moab was the location of Mount Nebo, where Moses, let me go back here. where Moses saw the promise. He died. God at least let him see it, but he didn't let him enter it. And Moses went up from the plains of Moab unto the mountain of Nebo to the top of Pisgah that is over against Jericho, and the Lord showed him all the land. And here's a view from Mount Nebo today, and it's a video, so hopefully it'll play. Very rugged, beautiful terrain, and you can see it quite the distance. So Moses stood right here and was able to see the promised land, but he wasn't able to enter into it. Now there's 4 rivers to the east side of the Jordan: the Zered, Arnon, Jabbok, and Yarmuk. They're all right here in a row. Hopefully you guys recognize a couple of those names. The Jabbok was where Jacob wrestled with the angel of the Lord and was named Israel. That's right here. Jerusalem is right here on this little red dot. Here's what it looks like today in modern. If it was me and I was staging the picture, I probably would have put 2 guys in an all-out battle on the other side of the river just for the picture. But they didn't do that. Maybe put some wings on one of them or something. Now, over to the west, we have the Philistines, right? Israel's always dealing with them. We have the stories of the judges and Samson. And they have these 5 major cities: Ashdod, Ekron, Ashkelon, Gath, and Gaza. And we saw Ashkelon earlier in a picture of the coast. And you guys, if you remember, when the Philistines, they transferred it from city to city because God kept cursing everywhere where it settled down, right? And so they moved them from all these different cities, trying to get rid of it, but kind of like a hot potato. Now down to the south, we have this prominent nation of Egypt that's frequently talked about in the Bible. We know the Israelites were there for 400 years in slavery. Through Egypt runs this very famous river called the Nile. It runs the entire length of the country. In the Bible, it's called a couple different things: Sihor, or the river. Also perhaps the river of Egypt in Genesis 15, but it runs all the way from the south all the way up to the north. The same river the daughter of Pharaoh put baby Moses in. And to blood. So the Nile originates with 2 rivers in Africa called the White Nile and the Blue Nile, and then it flows north up towards. Up near the top, it splits off into all these different little rivulets. It's called a delta. It actually comes from the uppercase Greek letter D delta, which is shaped like a triangle. That's where we get the idea of a river delta. So the country is divided into 2 sections. The bottom is was early in Old Testament times. Now to the north, we've covered to the east and west. To the north of Israel was Phoenicia, with its cities of Tyre and Sidon right here on the coast. Also, way further up north, we have Syria, with the capital of Damascus. And Damascus is right here. I don't know if you guys can see that or not. Now, way over to the east, we have the big cities of Nineveh, Media, Babylon, and Elam. So Jonah, as an example, when he tries to run away, he hops a boat to head off this direction. God says no, and he actually has to go inland quite a ways to get to Nineveh to preach to them. There was also, we talked about the fact that this is a land bridge here through Canaan. Remember, the Arabian Desert is over here somewhere. There's 2 major roads that led south from Damascus, that led all the way around the Arabian Desert and ultimately down to Egypt, called the Coastal Highway and the King's Highway. The Coastal Highway came into Canaan way up here north of the Sea of Galilee and then went down past the Mediterranean coast. For that reason, it was called the Way of the Philistines, because remember, all of their cities were right here. And then the Romans also called it the Way of the Sea. And it went all the way down here to Egypt. Main travel route. The King's Highway ran down the east side over here on the other side of the nation of Israel and on the other side of the Dead Sea. This is the road that Israel actually wanted to take from the wilderness north through Edom and the kingdom of the Amorites to the Jabbok River. And it says that right in Numbers. That's exactly where they were going to go. And so the King's Highway runs all the way again to Egypt. So these main routes of trade would go from Egypt up here to these big cities, and they'd use these two highways. This is also the highway the kings of Mesopotamia took when they came all the way over here and they attacked Sodom. You guys remember the Queen of Sheba? She would have traveled on one of these routes to get to see King Solomon in Jerusalem as well. She had to go all the way up that highway. Now, when we talk about the expression from Dan to Beersheba, it's used to describe basically the extent of the nation of Israel in books like 1st and 2nd Samuel and Judges. This is talking about the entire country. We have Jerusalem right here, Bethlehem just south of it, Capernaum all the way up here. A couple different places. In Bethel, Abraham built his first altar. From there, Lot went to Sodom, right over here. And then after Lot was captured by the Shinar kings, Abraham chased them all the way up here to Dan and rescued him. And then later, Abraham planted a grove way down here and dwelt here and lived in Beersheba. So we're not talking about a massive span of distance, but it is very rugged territory. When the 12 tribes were divided and settled into the land, this is approximately how they were assigned, their borders. This all fits within that from Dan to Beersheba that we just talked about. Up here to the north we have Asher, Naphtali, Zebulun, and Issachar, all packed into that little spot. And then we have Manasseh, Ephraim, Dan, and Benjamin here in the middle. Judah and Simeon are way down here at the bottom. And then the rest are over here to the east, all east of the Jordan River. And that's generally how they were laid out in the country of Israel. Now the Jordan River splits that country right in half. It's 156 miles long and it runs pretty much the whole length of the country from north to south, meeting the Dead Sea at the bottom, going through the Sea of Galilee at the top. There's two main headwaters. They're at the foot of Mount Hermon that I mentioned at the very beginning, the Dan Spring and the Benias Spring, up here, right there north of the Sea of Galilee. Here's a couple pictures of where it starts. Idol worship. It's named after the Roman god Pan, and there used to be a temple right here in this cave. That's roughly what it might have looked like. So this video is the Jordan River not very far from that spring. Notice how much water is coming out of that thing. It's a good sized river even at that point. So the river flows there to the waters of Merom, or Lake Huldah, and then on down to the Sea of Galilee. So all throughout this area we have very lush, a lot of agriculture can occur there. Here's what the waters of Merom look like today, kind of like a big swamp. There's some type of critter out there in the middle. Here's something called a lutra. So, in some ways, it looks similar to interior rivers, right? The high reeds and rushes on the side. Yep, there it is. So the Jordan exits the Sea of Galilee on the south and it flows on down to the Dead Sea. And between there it has this big fertile plain called the Jordan Plain, where it's all watered by that one river. Now the Dead Sea is known in the Bible as the Salt Sea and also the Sea of the Plain in Deuteronomy. It's called dead because there's no way for the water to get out of it. And so everything that washes into that sea just builds up there and concentrates. There's really nothing alive in it at all but bacteria because the chemicals are so potent. It's also the lowest place of any landmass on Earth, 1,300 feet below sea level. It's not terribly big. It's 34 miles long and 11 miles wide, and it's pretty deep. It gets up to 1,400 feet deep. So a big old sinkhole full of water. And it's about 33% salinity. So it's 9 times more salty than the ocean. Here's some salt flats that are formed by evaporation of the water. And here's a huge chunk of salt sitting on the side of the lake. So they use it, they harvest salt out of this lake. And if you went there and swam, you wouldn't sink. You'd just float because of how salty it is. It's a pretty arid place, less than 2 inches of rainfall. And then it's also really hot, 90 and 100 degrees, 102 degrees. Pretty miserable spot. But they use the sea for all kinds of different things with salt and the different chemicals. And it's also been used as a health spa. There's a whole bunch of stuff that lives in the area around it. We have camel, ibex, hare, hyrax, or coney. That's this little creature here. Jackal, fox, and leopard, as well as hundreds of bird species. Here's an ibex, and it's called a wild goat in the Bible. The coney lives in the rocks, just like the Bible says. That's what it looks like. Funny looking little creature. So Sodom and Gomorrah were located up north of the Dead Sea. Still very arid place at this point. However, before they were destroyed, it was a very beautiful, lush place. It looked much like this does, like a garden. It says in Genesis, Lot lifted up his eyes and beheld all the plain of Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere, before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, even as the garden of the Lord. It was a very desirable spot of land. But Moses described what was left afterwards and what we see now, that the whole land thereof is brimstone and salt and burning, that it is not sown, nor beareth, nor any grass groweth therein, like the overthrow of Sodom and Gomorrah. It's a nasty, rough place. Now, people have contended for many different locations for Sodom and Gomorrah and the other cities of the plain that were ruined and destroyed by God. Some people have thought that they were way down here at the bottom west side of the sea. Others have said that no, they're over here at the bottom east side. Others have said that they're actually now buried and submerged under the water. But we can tell from studying the Bible exactly where it really is. The Arabs even down here have a mountain called Mount Sodom. And it doesn't look like much of a mountain to me, but here's from up on top of it, out on the Dead Sea. Genesis 13 says, Lot lifted up his eyes from Bethel, which is right here, and he saw the region all the way over to the east, and it was described as the plain of Jordan. And so Lot was actually in Bethel when he left Abraham and he journeyed to the east, to the plain of Jordan. So Sodom and the other 5 cities are called the cities of the plain. So most likely they were located right here at the north edge of the Dead Sea. Now, Israel is divided into several different territories. The south is called the Negev, and this is just the Hebrew word translated south. After Abraham left Bethel, he went south, and so he ended up down in the Negev. Also down there we have the wilderness of Zen and Paran, and when Israel wandered before they were allowed to enter the land, this is roughly where they were. And we've joked about the fact that we're not talking about a large geographical area here at all. The reality is not so much that they were just completely lost, but that God was not permitting them to enter the land for a specific length of time. But yes, it is a very small area. Now, Jerusalem has been the capital of Israel for a long time. At one point it was named Jebus when it was captured from the Jebusites. It's also called Zion, and it's mentioned a lot in the Bible. It's right here. It will be the capital of Christ's kingdom. This is what it looks like in modern day. It's very populated. Unfortunately, today Muslim mosques sit right where the old Temple Mount used to be. Here's what it looks like today. Down here we have Gehenna, or the Hinnom Valley, the Temple Mount here, the Kidron Valley, and then the Mount of Olives up over here. And you guys will notice it's extremely mountainous. It's all uphill. Mount Moriah, where Abraham was willing to offer Isaac, is right about where the Temple Mount was located. So we can verify it's roughly right here. Here's what it would have looked like. So we have Mount Moriah up here. We have these 2 valleys that come down, the Kidron and the Hinnom. And then we have the fortification of Jerusalem right here. So understand, they built it specifically for defense. It's up on this mound so that they were able to build a wall and prevent people from coming in. Over here we have the Mount of Olives, and it's all one big mountainside. Here's an illustration of the threshing floor of Aruna up on Mount Moriah, and then looking down towards the city of Jerusalem. So this big valley called the Kidron Valley divides the Mount of Olives from the Temple Mount. It's a significant place. Here it is looking down south today. still some greenery. We have the Temple Mount up here, and then we have this big deep valley. And the Kidron Valley runs all the way from Jerusalem all the way down to the Dead Sea. After it leaves Jerusalem, it turns into this really steep canyon that's basically impassable. It also goes down 4,000 feet. So when the Bible talks about going down to such and such a place, it's literally like straight down. Quite a journey both up and down. And then the Kidron Valley right here empties out into the Dead Sea. Now when Christ returns, a river is going to flow from the temple and heal the Dead Sea, according to Ezekiel. It says, "Then he said unto me, These waters issue out towards the east country, and go down into the desert, and go into the sea, which being brought forth into the sea, the waters shall be healed." And I'm assuming that refers to the fact that the Dead Sea is dead right now, that those waters will be healed. "And it shall come to pass that everything that liveth, which moveth, whithersoever the rivers shall come, shall live. And there shall be a very great multitude of fish, because these waters shall come thither, for they shall be healed, and everything shall live whither the river cometh." So David crossed the Kidron, fleeing Absalom. He would have run right through this valley. King Asa burned his mother's idols here. Josiah burned the idols here as well. Jesus also crossed the valley when he was going from the Last Supper to the Garden of Gethsemane. And the Kidron Valley meets up with the other valley, the Hinnom Valley, down here at the bottom of the city. Here's what it looks like today, just a paved intersection where these two valleys come together. I don't know about you guys, but I have almost no concept of the size of this place. Being from Alaska, with all of our land mass and having to travel several hours to get anywhere, we're not talking about a big city or a big area at all. Here's the Valley of Gehenna. It's also a name for hell in the Bible, and this is where they used to burn their garbage. It's east of the city of David that we just looked at over here. When Israelites were doing their idol worship, when they were apostatizing, it was here that they sacrificed their children, down here in this valley. And they have built the high places of Tophet, which is in the valley of the son of Hinnom, to burn their sons and their daughters in the fire, which I commanded them not, neither came unto my heart. What do you guys think that is? That's an altar to Baal in the valley that they were using at some point. So Bethlehem, the birthplace of David and Jesus, is just south of Jerusalem, not very far away from it. Today Bethlehem is under Palestinian control, and tourists can't do a whole lot. Here's the Church of the Nativity where Jesus' manger was supposedly located. Leave it to the Eastern Greek Orthodox. And they'll go in there and they'll touch the supposed site of the manger, and it's a big deal to them. Also, you can visit this place called the Milk Grotto, where Mary supposedly stopped to feed the baby. How would you like that to be the name of your church, the Milk Grotto Church? Apparently that was significant to them. Here's the field near Bethlehem that's believed to be the place where the shepherds would have seen the angels and were grazing their sheep. It's still fairly green even today. Now Galilee is the entire region around the sea, all up here. And this is where we see most of the events during Jesus' life taking place. So it is significant. So like I said, we're going to talk about some New Testament stuff as well. The Sea of Galilee is called many different things, and generally it's called that because it's shaped like this particular musical instrument. That's what all the names reference. Lake Gennesaret is another name for it, and it's named after a place up here on the northwestern side of the lake. And then we have Lake Tiberius is another name in John, and that's named after the name of a major city on the western shore of the lake. Here's a map of all the different cities around the Lake of Galilee. It's not a big lake. It's about 33 miles around, 13 miles long, and 8 miles wide, and it's also not very deep. It's about 141, 200 feet deep at the deepest point. And remember, it's fed by that river we talked about earlier, the Jordan, which enters in from the north, and it's also fed by underground springs. Here's what it looks like where the Jordan River flows into the Sea of Galilee, up near the top. And here's where the Jordan flows out of the Sea of Galilee. We joked about people who have for some reason really want to go there.
Vamos a iniciar o canal, ¿verdad?
Very slow moving. We know many things occurred around this lake. All kinds of events in the New Testament are described in some of the different cities and spots around the lake. When Jesus began his public ministry, he moved to the Sea of Galilee from Nazareth, right here, from where he'd grown up. Moved over here. And that road went north from Nazareth and entered the area of the sea by the pass between Mount Arbel and Mount Natay. That's these two features right here. And then we have this valley that goes in between. This is looking from the top of Mount Arbel towards the north end of the Sea of Galilee, and Magdala is just down here. So a pretty beautiful place, even today. The Arbel Pass, where it enters near the Sea of Galilee, looking west towards Nazareth. So this is the path Jesus would have taken and his disciples right through this valley. Now we know that his disciples were fishermen in the Sea of Galilee. And Capernaum was where Jesus lived with Peter up here on the northwest side. This is what it looks like. At one time it had a very nice harbor. Now it's generally fallen into disuse, but it's still a pretty place. Here's probably what it looked like, the harbor at Capernaum. Now, for the Sermon on the Mount mentioned in Matthew, it probably occurred near the west side of the lake over here at Tabgha, and the Bible says that Jesus was on a mountain near the sea. And over here there's actually a huge spot where a ton of people could have sat and listened to him. It kind of forms a natural amphitheater. In this video here, there's actually, we don't have to listen to it, but someone's talking, and you can kind of test to see what the acoustics are like out there even today. But you can see there's a ton of space there. Thousands of people could have sat there and listened quite easily.
So theoretically,
I'm not going all the way up there to test it. I was thinking somebody stand out here and then you could hear it.
theoretically, you can walk up.
And if you look down to the Sea of Galilee, we see that it is indeed on a mountainside. It comes right up off the ocean and gets pretty steep in a hurry. Now, the parable of the sower, where Jesus actually got into a boat and preached, we can also determine roughly where that was. And he began again to teach by the seaside, and there was gathered unto him a great multitude, so he entered into a ship. Well, look here. This cove forms a very natural amphitheater where you could put a little boat here and people could sit and they could listen. And wouldn't you know it, somebody went over and actually experimented with it to try to talk and see how it would work, and it worked just fine. The surface of the water acts like a microphone, and you can hear people talking quite easily when they sit out in a boat and they preach from there. The feeding of the 5,000 took place on a mountain. It would have been in the vicinity of Bethsaida up here on the northeast side of the lake. And then the 4,000 just south of that on the east side, after Jesus returned from Tyre and Sidon. This is the traditional place of the feeding of the 4,000, looking across the lake. It's a little bit washed out in here, but you can actually see the lake. And this is what it looks like from the sea. Tiberius was a Roman city built by Herod. It's right here on the west side. This is what it looks like from the sea. City of Tiberius, right there. This is a drawing of ancient Tiberius and what it looked like with its harbor here. It's a big gate and wall, and then all of the structures inside. Magdala on the west side is where Mary Magdalene was from. Matthew 15:39 references that. Here's Mount Arbel, and here's the little town of Magdala down below. As you can see, that it's quite a large mountain and a very small town. Now I want you to look. now. Magdala had a harbor. It's pretty much covered over now and not used, but at one point it was all cleaned out and they were using it for fishing. And the fish processed in the Sea of Galilee were sold all over the place. In 2009, a large synagogue was discovered there, and a coin found in one of the rooms dates right to the time of Jesus. Guess what? Jesus would have preached right here. He said he taught in their synagogues all throughout Galilee. This is what remains of one of them. You guys remember the story of the demoniac with the pigs that ran into the ocean? We can also get a pretty good idea of where that was, because there's really just one spot where the land runs right straight into the sea, and that's what it describes in the Bible. So that's right where it would have occurred. And if you look down, it just goes right straight into the water. Jesus also did a lot of preaching in Capernaum, Bethsaida, and Chorazin, all up here on the north side of the shore. They didn't respond. He said, "Woe unto thee, Chorazin, woe unto thee, Bethsaida, for if the mighty works which are done in you had been done in Tyre and Sidon, they would have repented long ago in sackcloth and ashes." And here we have Chorazin as it stands today. And Bethsaida, just a pile of rocks. And Capernaum, that's all that's left. Now Nazareth is down here to the southwest. Here we have the Sea of Galilee we just talked about. Nazareth is over here. It's where Jesus grew up. If you guys remember, his own people tried to throw him down, and this is the hill where they would have done it. It's a cliff. It's quite steep because of his preaching. Up north of that is Cana. That's where Jesus turned water into wine, did his first miracle. And then we have the valley of Jezreel, also called the plain of Esdraelon, or the Greek form of Jezreel. It's largely agriculture today. The valley is named for the city, which is the location of the summer palace of Ahab. Here's the remains of the Jezreel watchtower looking towards Mount Moriah and the Jezreel Valley out over here. That's it right there. The valley is approximately right there. Remember, Nazareth is about right there. Here's the Sea of Galilee. So we have the sea here, Jezreel, Samaria, and down here is Jerusalem. Now the valley of Jezreel meets up with the Harod Valley to the east and the Megiddo Valley on the west to form one huge open area right there in the middle. The Harod Valley gets its name from the spring where Gideon separated his men, and this is what it looks like today. A beautiful place. The river Kishon flows through the valley. Goes right down here through the valley of Jezreel. Up here we have Mount Carmel. And then Jezreel, the ancient city, is located on the east side of the plain, and Megiddo is on the west. And Mount Carmel's up here on the north. Now Mount Gilboa and the Samaritan Mountains are down here to the south, bridging the bottom boundary of this huge plain. Here we have Nazareth, Tabor, up to the north. Here's another more topographical map. So we have the big plain here and then mountains kind of all around it. Here's a photo taken from Megiddo looking across the valley to Tabor, Endor, Morah, Harod Valley, the city of Jezreel, and Gilboa. And here's the plain of Megiddo here. So a lot of agriculture going on today. And the plain this is how people got from up north near Damascus down to Egypt. It was the easiest passage. And additionally, more battles have been fought right here than anywhere else on earth because it's such a commonly used spot for travel. It's also been the scene of all kinds of stuff from the Bible. As an example, Deborah and Barak defeated the Canaanites in the book of Judges. They met over here on Mount Tabor, and Barak launched his assault to the Canaanites in the valley. And then the river Kishon flooded in Judges and swept part of Sisera's army away. Usually it's small, but sometimes it floods. Gideon also defeated the Midianites in this valley as well. The Philistines defeated Israel and killed Saul and Jonathan on Mount Gilboa overlooking the valley. Here we have Mount Gilboa, the valley, and then Mount Moriah over here. So they gathered by Mount Moriah, and the Israelites were encamped at Jezreel at the foot of Mount Gilboa. And then here's looking across the valley to Mount Moriah from Jezreel. At one point, Saul visited the witch at Endor, and that was all the way over here through the mist on the other side. The Philistines fought Israel at Jezreel and Gilboa and killed Saul and his sons, and they nailed the bodies of Saul and his sons to the wall of Beth-shan. But the men of Jabesh Gilead traveled all the way across the valley from over here, retrieved the bodies from here, and buried them. Here's what the hill of Beth-shan looks like, and the hills of Gilead are off here in the distance.
Looking toward Jezreel, Gilboa. Out to the right is Megiddo. Mount Moriah on the right.
Significant in the future. King Ahaziah and King Jehoram were killed by Jehu. King Josiah was killed here by the king of Egypt. A lot of stuff happened here. In 1799, Napoleon routed a Turk force of 25,000 with just 2,000 men. In 1918, British forces defeated a Turkish army there, and they took control. And it's also where the Battle of Armageddon is going to happen. Megiddo, or Armageddon, means Hill of Megiddo. In this big plain, that battle is going to be fought. Here's a view of the plain from Mount Carmel. So just imagine Elijah up there, the prophets of Baal. This is generally what he would have seen.
How do we know this is his spot? Well, I usually say because Benjamin of Tudela
Quite the vantage point.
and says he sees 12 stones. They sacrificial. But that's impossible, right?
All right, speaking of Mount Carmel, it sits up here on the northern coast of Israel. It views the ocean over here, and then the valley we just looked at, and it's 1,724 feet high. It's a big mountain, 24 miles long, 5 miles wide. We know this is where Elijah challenged the prophets. He also lived on Carmel, and it's here that the woman of Shunem found him after her son died. Now, in between Joppa and Sharon, or Carmel and Joppa is Sharon. That's right here on the coast of the Mediterranean. It's called the Plain of Sharon. It receives more rain than any other part of Israel. And the Bible says that in Christ's kingdom, the whole land is going to blossom like this one spot. Here we have the city of Caesarea. It's right here in Sharon. Philip the evangelist lived here. Cornelius lived here. And Paul was actually in prison there for 2 years. Gilead is over here to the east, on the east of the Jordan River. And then up here to the north we have Bashan, which is mentioned in Deuteronomy, Psalms, Ezekiel, famed for rich pasture and fat cattle. Here's some of them, 3 of them. And all these areas are going to, again, belong to Israel during Christ's kingdom. Now, Samaria was a region smack dab in the middle of Israel. The city of Samaria was the capital of Israel's northern kingdom at one point. It was destroyed by the Assyrians, and it was repopulated by pagan people from all over here. And that's why it ended up being ostracized by the Jews, because they were mixed with. So people were brought from this entire area back over here into Samaria to repopulate it. We're getting close. We have Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim. These were 2 mountains near Shechem, right here. Just to orient you guys, we have Nazareth way up here, so we're talking quite a bit more further south. These are the mountains where the Jewish tribes pronounced their blessings and curses. Here's what they looked like. Here's Shechem, the city. We have Gerizim and Ebal, and I actually read an interesting account of some guys that got up there and started yelling back and forth to see if they could hear each other, and they could. In Shechem, Abraham received God's promise. Jacob purchased a field there. Obviously, it's quite populated now. This is all buildings down here in the valley. Simeon and Levi killed the people of Shechem for defiling Dinah, and it was also a city of refuge. And then Shiloh was where the tabernacle was set up after Israel entered the land. Hannah came there and prayed for a son. Right here. And then the battle between David and Goliath occurred in the Elah Valley, which is only 14 miles west of Bethlehem. Remember, David traveled from Bethlehem over here to the valley. Here's what it looks like. Looking across the valley from the hill where Israel was camped. This is the valley down here, and then on the other side, the Philistines were camped. And then Goliath came right out here into this valley and mocked Israel. Here's the valley right now today. Here's the place where the brook ran, where he selected his stones. Unfortunately, it's dry most of the year now. That's what it looks like. So, Israel is a rocky place. There's all different kinds of land there, different kinds of environments. It goes all the way from 9,200 feet above sea level to 1,300 feet below sea level. It's a very rocky and variegated terrain. You guys see here that it's pretty much all mountains. You can see this rift that runs right down here. Israel is right on this little land bridge. And then we have just mountains everywhere. North, south, the Arabian Desert over here. You can see why they had to take very specific routes to go where they wanted to go, because it was just impassable. You couldn't go anywhere else. And God actually addresses those mountains when he's talking about Israel's conversion in Ezekiel. But ye, O mountains of Israel, ye shall shoot forth your branches and yield your fruit to my people of Israel, for they are at hand to come. That Israel would be right here on this strip. We have the Dead Galilee, Mount Hermon up here, and the Dead Sea down here. Okay. Any questions? Go back and not go through the slides again, but wants to go back through. I have some review questions too that I'd be totally willing to send out to you if you want to go through those and answer those yourself. Again, the more knowledge we can have about some of this area and the better we're oriented towards it, the more we're going to understand everything we're going to talk about from this point on. So I'd encourage you guys to take full advantage of that. A lot of interesting information about the area. Really an important thing for each of us to retain. After service, if you want that, I'd be happy to email it to you. Like I said, I do have a whole PDF of all of these. That's bright. I'll have something to hand out to you guys through email on Monday, and we'll progress through there. I appreciate your attention.